Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Assalamu alaikum. It's a pleasure having you all here for our discussion tonight at this beautiful venue provided by our kind guests here at KAUST. I want to take this moment to thank everyone involved at the university and the team in collaboration with us, to bring you this event today. The Saudi Sustainability Talks are one of the first engagements under the banner of Aon Collective. Aon Collective is a research entity with the objective of convening and propagating knowledge through research and discussion. Our mission under Collective, through its multiple initiatives, is to enhance dialogue and advance cooperation and efforts towards sustainable development. We aim to build a dynamic knowledge community that generates and shares ideas, expertise, and experiences throughout multiple activities and initiatives. The first hour of our talk tonight will be in a webinar format, which will begin with our main speakers presenting their views, followed by a Q&A and select interventions from our online and in-person guests. We ask you to please use the chat box and send your questions to the speakers, whether it's on our website, Vimeo, YouTube, LinkedIn, or Zoom. If you'd like to add on to the discussion, we'd request you to please raise your hand and we will loop you into the video dialogue for discussion. Part 2 of the session will see an end to our live stream and will be closed session under the Chatham House rules in spirit of open and informal discussion we want to promote here. The Chatham House rule is used around the world to encourage inclusive and open dialogue in meetings. I'm delighted to have some spectacular guests with us tonight who I will be introducing shortly. Our topic tonight is titled Cities of Action, Challenging Conventional Methods of Rapid Urbanization During the Next Decade. With half of the global population living in urban environments today, the world faces a big challenge in the next decades as our urban centers grow. The subject sets to explore the challenges and innovative methods developing cities intend to apply, looking at it from a global perspective and juxtaposing it with regional and local efforts throughout the kingdom and the wider GCC. With that, it's time to go to open up our panel discussion. And the way I want to do it is that I'll give each speaker around 7 minutes, and I'll give them a short introduction about them on the subject, and then we'll open up the discussion among all the speakers. The first to speak is Professor Joseph Condit. Joseph retired from the OECD in 2011 after serving as head of Urban Affairs Division and Regulatory Policy Division. He's the author of Cities in Crisis, and an honorary professor at the University of Glasgow, alongside being an associate fellow at the New Cities Foundation. With that, Professor Joseph.
Thank you very much. This is indeed a pleasure, an honor to speak to you from afar. I wish I were in the room with you. And I'm very grateful to all involved for making this possible and extending this invitation to me. I have the difficult task of being the first speaker because there's so many different angles on this important topic. But I thought I would begin by just simply dealing with the word sustainable urban development. What are we talking about? First of all, cities are where most people live, and that's where they're going to live. Nobody has ever succeeded in de-urbanizing a country, at least not peacefully. Second, development, which means it's another way of saying we want a better way of living, one that is holistic, that deals with education, with health, with the environment, as well as with the economy. And sustainable means that we want to do things that create a legacy for the future and hopefully transfer fewer problems that we may have inherited ourselves. Now, there's no magic formula for getting there. Each country, each city will have a different set of targets, different objectives. And this is why it is important to talk about redevelopment of the urban core. This is the aspect of the problem that I've been asked to address. Now, in the post-war era, when cities grew very rapidly in North America and before they began growing very rapidly in Asia and the Middle East, uh, there was a tendency to concentrate a lot of development on greenfield sites and outside the already built up area of the city. This was fast, it was economical, millions of people could be rehoused or could find housing and jobs relatively quickly. And a great boom ensued. There's no question about that. But this process created problems. In particular, there are various words for it, whether it's distressed urban areas or hollowing out. Large parts of the older part of the city declined. They were starved of investment. People moved in, but they often were the poorest people in the urban region. And problems developed. Environmental problems became concentrated. Social problems became concentrated. And another spiral had to take place of attacking the urban core. Meanwhile, the outer edges kept growing. What we realize now is that you need a comprehensive approach which deals with containing the outer edge part of the city where greenfield development can go ahead more easily and regenerating the older, often historic urban cores of the city. Even a city as well endowed with an historic center as Paris is finding that this is difficult because of the problems of housing and transportation, whether the automobile in particular, pollution. Now, many cities have succeeded at what you might call something like a win-win, tackling the urban core and the outer edge at the same time. I think Paris is on the road for that kind of a solution, but it's a long-term investment. You talk about 10 years, and it's certainly a 10-year horizon. There are many things, however, that can be done to make the urban core viable and keep it viable, sustainable. And this is very important because it's the best way to achieve the greatest agglomeration effect, the effect that comes from aggregating human and physical assets in the same place. That's what cities do. They bring together an enormous variety of assets, some of them material, some of them knowledge-based, and concentrate them in a particular place. Getting all those assets to work together, to congeal, to interact, to create synergies is not automatic. It doesn't just happen like a chemical formula. And so there are a variety of things that can be done to make this more likely to happen. I begin with capturing local assets. The older parts of the city are more likely to be richly endowed in specific immovable assets. Their very identity as a place being one. They have something unique. Capitalize on it. Consult with the people who live and work there. They know. The second thing is to upgrade the environment. Very often, the older parts of the city have deficiencies. Maybe the infrastructure is old and out of date for water, sewer, power, transport. It may be an environmental hazard that needs to be cleaned up. It could be an old river. This is the case of Seoul, for example, that was polluted, unattractive. Clean it up, and you'll be amazed at the kind of investment that comes back. Exploit the advantages of a central location. This is another immovable asset. very often greenfield sites are poorly connected. They have low connectivity. Older urban areas often have a high latent connectivity that can be exploited. We see this in many medium and large European cities through transport infrastructure, now the tramway in many locations, and connecting the outer edge and the inner part of the city together. Creating new economic activity. Very often, this involves small and medium-sized firms, startups, entrepreneurship, teaching entrepreneurship to the local people who live in an older urban area, transforming old activities into new ones through investment, technological upgrading, and something that we've seen increasingly, the importance of breaking down the walls between universities and the communities around them. Very often, older urban areas are richly endowed with cultural institutions. Sometimes in the past, those institutions literally were walled off. They were impressive, they were big, and to somebody who didn't have a purpose in them, they were intimidating to go into. Break down the walls, and that's also a mental metaphor for getting people from different parts of the city to communicate with each other. And next to the final point, design quality. It's not enough to have good building standards. Talent and imagination take time and money. Good design calls for careful coordination with all the stakeholders, inside government and outside government. A strong, compelling design can solve a lot of problems when trying to regenerate an older part of the city. Proving that design quality pays is not easy. Companies and cities don't like to reveal that kind of information. We do know that there are examples that can be used to convince people that spending more upfront sometimes is an economy in the long run. My last 2 points, however, deal with governance. Good urban regeneration involves several sectors. It involves the public authorities, community groups and representatives, the private sector. It involves people with expertise in many different domains. Getting them to work together is not always easy. Sometimes there are governmental regulations that make it unusually difficult. I think that universities and schools can help educate people when they are acquiring professional competencies to think and work in a cross-sectoral, interdisciplinary way. We've seen the problem that happens in the COVID epidemic when health people, government, political decision makers, economists don't communicate, don't share the same language, don't know how to influence one another, and mistakes in policy are made. We have to learn how to do this, and I think the university that is training people in particular professional domains should make this an important part of the curriculum. Everybody will benefit. The second final point is the challenge of adapting innovations from one country or one city to another. When I was in the OECD, how often did we hear traveling around the world, oh, that's very good, but it won't work here. But people don't always think of why. Is there something a roadblock, a barrier that we can remove? Is there something that we can exchange with other people and learn how they solve problems to make their innovation work? Maybe our innovation will be different, but it's the problem-solving strategy that can be shared, perhaps not the final solution. So yes, we know that one size doesn't fit all, but we're all in this together. The UN Sustainable Development Goal 11 is all about cities, but it's all about almost everything else because it covers housing, transport, planning, heritage protection, disaster vulnerability, waste reduction, air quality, public space, the links between the city and the countryside, and integrated plans. It leaves nothing out. All we have to do is do it. So I look forward to the questions and the discussion and the interventions of the other speakers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joseph, for that. You know, something that you said early on, and you also repeated towards the end, there is no magic formula for getting there. But I do believe that the actions of the people and the community is something that is integrated, that people aren't really paying that much attention to in terms of following up with development. But thank you for that. With that, let's turn now to Karim El-Gindi, our second speaker. Karim is a chartered architect and sustainability consultant at DAR in London. He is an associate fellow at Chatham House and founder of Carbon, an advocacy initiative promoting sustainability in cities in the Middle East and North Africa. He is also the recipient of the 2013 Global Green Building Entrepreneurship Award by the World Green Building Council. Karim?
Thank you. Thank you, Faris, for that kind introduction, and also thanks to Joseph for the great overview. I think it makes my job a lot easier to start from where he ended. If I can share my screen. Can you all see my screen? Great. Okay. So in order to provide some context, I will get to my take on the urban challenges facing the MENA region specifically. But in order to provide some context, I needed to take a few steps back. I promise I will be brief. I won't go through the entire history of the Middle East in doing so. But I just felt that there was a narrative in terms of how did cities of the region come to where they are, in order to understand how to move forward from that. So human settlements in the MENA region have emerged against the odds. This is the first issue that I need to make clear to everyone, and perhaps more so than any other region in the world. But urbanism in the context of the MENA region is also a product of necessity. Human settlements have actually developed against a backdrop of harsh environmental conditions, scarce natural resources, limited arable land, which has all limited the development of a rural area in most parts of the region. So it's the lack of ruralism that pushed people towards an urban life. But in a way, the urban choice was the urban life was the life of choice. But that wasn't the whole story. The human settlements could only emerge in the locations that could support them, the locations that have enough water or have enough biocapacity. And biocapacity here is the ability to produce useful organic material like food. So the ability of Earth to produce useful material. And they could only grow based on these two constraints, water and biocapacity, as much as they can support them. So the hinterland only has a limited ability of food to produce to keep a city growing. So the city is not going to grow exponentially. It's still dependent on its immediate hinterland. And of course, the more successful settlements of this region didn't just offer having fresh water, groundwater, or surface water, or just a little bit of biocapacity, the ability to produce food, but they offered a little bit more than that. And these are the ones that tended to become successful, become cities more than just human settlements. So these are the ones that have enjoyed perhaps more moderate climate, a port, proximity to a navigable river, for example, or proximity to a land trade route, for example. And these are the ones that have accumulated enough capital through trade in order to grow into towns and cities as we know them today. And this is the story of all the settlements along Tariq al-Liban, the frankincense route, for example. So Ma'rib and Najran and Mecca and Medina and Khaybar and Gaza, all of these have grown exactly that same way. And the same arrangement for Tariq al-Harir, so for the Silk Route. We have the same arrangement in Ray, where Tehran is today, Mosul, Raqqa, and Halab, and Damascus, and Trablus. They've all grown into cities using that same structure. And they have actually developed fairly well. They've produced an urbanism that was fairly environmentally responsive. The buildings responded to their environment fairly well in terms of what we now call sustainable design or passive design. Environmentally responsive is the more generic term. And they largely remained within their ecological boundaries, within the carrying capacity, if you like, of their immediate hinterland, their area surrounding them that can support a population of a particular size. But the 20th century saw quite a drastic change from that. The trade surpluses that were created by the oil and gas exports, all the oil and gas revenues, together with the globalization, have created a globalization of hinterland. The hinterland is no longer surrounding a city, but has actually become a commodified product that can be sold around or distributed from one geographic region to another. And that has allowed the cities of this region, which had that shortage, to overcome their traditional handicap, their traditional weakness of having limited water and limited biocapacity. So that globalization of hinterland has enabled the cities of this region to overcome deficiencies in water, biocapacity, and their lack of good weather. So what happened is basically cities of this region have managed to import food, import virtual water in the form of food. They also imported technologies such as desalination and imported air conditioning. And they've all effectively managed to mask their fundamental weaknesses. And that doubtlessly, and there's no question about it, has improved living conditions across the region. And it has also created a sense of resource abundance that fueled rapid urbanization. When people are comfortable, people tend to have more children, and they settle and they move into big cities. And that leads to a population growth in any given city where the conditions have improved. And it has, as I say, led to two trends, population growth and as well as a rural to urban migration. But it also has led to this perception that I notice quite regularly across the MENA region. And I don't really mean any particular city in mind. It's quite a common pattern here. That there's a perception that there is actual abundance, and that somehow we have managed to mask the region's fundamental environmental conditions and not think of them as enough as we should. So what happened is the share of urban population in the region has jumped. It's jumped from 1/6 of the population since the beginning of the 20th century, about 16% of the population, to 2/3 today, 65% across the entire MENA region. So that's in the span of 120 years, we've seen a rapid growth, about 4 times in terms of population living in cities. And this is obviously higher than the global average. It's not as high as the Western countries, though. So in the US, that ratio is about 82%, so 4/5 of the population live in cities in the US, and the EU is more in the region of 3/4, about 75%. But the MENA region is definitely higher than the global average. And in the GCC, where rural areas have really been quite limited historically, there was no really rural life as such, we have an 87% of the population live in urban areas, which is quite high by global standards. So in terms of urbanization, this is all good news. On the face of it, on the first glance, this is fantastic news. Urbanization is meant to be a net positive for any society. I think Joseph touched on that. Societies only urbanize. The urbanization project started in 19th century, and it's going to take its course until the end of the 20th century. And then everyone will be more or less urban. And that is a one direction route. It doesn't go any other direction. So urbanization is happening, for one, and it's also a good thing because it lays the base for sustainable life, and I'll explain how in a minute. So cities generally are meant to be, and I think Joseph touched on that as well, are meant to bring all these economic, environmental, and social benefits. They do have this promise out there that if you create a city or if you live in a city, you're meant to enjoy all of these benefits. And that's the reason, as a result of three things. One is agglomeration, and one is economies of scale, and the last one is the network effect. And basically, the proximity that was created by agglomeration, for example, your proximity to a service or to a particular outlet that you could perhaps find the niche product that you wouldn't necessarily have, can only happen within a city because of that high density. And it creates as well, it creates as a byproduct to that, it creates conditions for efficient use of energy, perhaps in mobility, because you don't need to travel far distances, and you could even use public transportation or even walk to there. It also created potential for improvement in the efficiency of energy use in space conditioning of buildings and cooling and heating of buildings. On the other hand, economies of scale have created cost advantages. And on the other hand, in terms of the network effect, it has this additional benefit of attracting capital in. So when you have a network effect, more people tend to come and join that network effect. So you end up with more capital coming into the city and more human capital coming into the city as well. But unfortunately, the cities of the Middle East, all of these things notwithstanding, all of the cities of the Middle East have by and large failed to capitalize on all of these benefits. They have not achieved the benefits of urbanization. Urbanization is happening, but it is not producing the benefits that it's supposed to deliver. And this is due to regional trends, alternative regional trends that are undermining urbanization and counteracting its benefits. And some of these are related to the speed at which urbanization happens. Urbanization during the 20th century in the MENA region was quite rapid. But some of them are also related to concentration of populations in one or two major cities. So the rural populations moved into one or two large cities. This is quite often the case in countries of the MENA region. And also we've witnessed some migration or conversions of rural populations into pockets, into urban villages, if you like, within cities. And these are two trends that have also undermined urbanization. But perhaps the most important trend, and I will end with this thought of mine, the most important trend that undermines urbanization is that of dedensification. And dedensification is basically a process where the size of the city grows at a higher rate than its urban population. The city grows as a percentage of its size faster than the population within it does grow. And it is driven by a number of drivers, number of factors, and these include suburbanization, which is quite common across, I don't want to name names, this picture particularly is from Cairo or one of Cairo's suburbs. Growth of gated communities, that often is the case with suburbanization. We have a preference for developing on virgin land just because of the ease of it. There's a lack of investment in urban cores. I think I was already touched on it by Faris and Joseph. And there is also a dependence on personal vehicles, which is a parallel driver that supplements the first drivers as well via the mobility network. But it's extremely important, and it often comes in hand in hand with a poor investment in public transportation. And finally, the lack of an urban containment policy, where there is a decision as to contain, say, a green belt, for example, to contain the city not to grow further, and as a result force it to densify. That hasn't happened across the cities of the MENA region. So this process of de-densification presents a serious challenge to regional efforts to transition to urban sustainability. It is the one thing that locks in impacts for decades. And this is because of the centrality of density in setting the level of resource consumption in any given city. Densities can actually lock in resource consumption for the life of the city, or the life of the buildings within the city and the infrastructure, until that gets refurbished. And often the case that could take decades for radical transformation of, say, the street layout or the overall density of the city. Certain neighborhoods can get densified in decades, but to change the entire city can take very long. And densities actually determine the economics of public transportation. Low density areas don't really get public transportation to work viably from an economic point of view. It kind of rules out whether you can have active mobility like walking and cycling, for example, if you have low density. It also, having low density would determine the material usage for infrastructure. So, for example, low densities tend to have long infrastructure runs. So you've automatically incurred an higher environmental footprint as a result. And lower density also lead to potentially inefficient heating and cooling, because every building becomes an island that needs to be space conditioned separately. So in other words, low urban density has the potential to cancel out all the energy efficiency benefits of urbanization. Not all of the benefits of urbanization, but the energy efficiency ones, the ones that relate to sustainability and obviously and carbon emissions. So we can, as a result, lock in effectively carbon emissions for decades. Once you've built the city this way and the energy efficiency benefits cannot be achieved, then you're depending, of course, on where you're getting your energy from, whether your energy sources come from renewable energy sources or fossil fuels, you could lock in carbon emissions for decades. And it's very hard to fix. And the American experience has been painful in how, say, comparing American cities to European cities. American cities, I think, use twice as much per capita in terms of energy use, and that's just because of the way the city is designed, and it's very hard to retrofit them. There's been experiences in California, and it takes very, very long to do that. So the way forward, in my opinion, is, as already has been mentioned by Joseph, is to get around this de-densification and suburbanization process by regenerating the urban cores. And I think I've exceeded my time, so I will end here, but I will be happy to, during the next half or during the Q&A and discussions, to go more into what solutions we could explore. And thank you for that.
Thank you, Karim. Very interesting points, and I think we definitely have to expand on the de-densification part during the discussion. Thank you. So now let's turn to Daya Doyan. Daya is the head of the Center for Urban Development and Urban Design and Planning of Saudi cities, previously under the Ministry of Municipality and Rural Affairs. She worked for McKinsey & Company as an advisor in the Master Planning and Urban Design as part of the transformation plan of Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030. She's the founder and principal of Daya Doyan Architects, and also a partner and exclusive representative of DKA Chicago in the Middle East. Welcome, Daya.
Hello. I am trying to share my screen. It's not. Can you see?
Yes.
Okay. So probably I will be touching on a lot of what has already been mentioned earlier on by Joseph and Karim. But I think it's worth repeating sometimes. So I will start with, well, first, we know that now 3% of the Earth's surface is urbanized, and we have over 50% of the world population now live in urban areas, expecting that we will have 2/3 of the population living in urban areas within the year 2050. Cities are engine of the modern economy and economic growth, contributing over 80% of global GDP. Urban areas consume 60 to 80% of all energy, producing and emitting 75% of the planet's carbon budget. Cities are human habitat first and foremost, and cities function as a catalyst of inclusion and innovation by bringing people together. Cities are the most complex human-made systems on Earth. Action within them are interconnected, and when taken have consequences, which then echo across these systems. Thus, sustainability needs a systematic approach. Therefore, sustainable development cannot be achieved without significantly changing the way we plan, develop, and manage our urbanization. The SDG Goal 11, Sustainable Cities and Communities, provide a guide for achieving inclusive, resilient, and sustainable cities by the year 2030. The shaping of urbanization involves many different stakeholders as well as forms and methods of planning. This requires great cross-sectorial coordination and more integrated approaches to planning. However, global planning experience reveals that there are serious challenges to such ambitions. And Saudi Arabia is experiencing a rapid urbanization, driving rural-urban migration and population growth over the last decades. 30 or 84% of the population now lives in urban areas. Saudi cities and towns have transformed from small local cities and towns of an inherent organic form and nature, traditionally focused on their community and local resources with local efficiency and production, into a sprawl large cities with modern and unsustainable urban patterns and dynamics. Despite the many advantages of the growth, both on the urban and the population, there are also many negative repercussions on the urban environment, its sustainability, as well as the quality of life in Saudi cities. Therefore, the Kingdom cities face a range of critical challenges that affect their sustainability. A continuing rapid urbanization and expansions of city is one. The inability to provide basic services, including affordable housing and infrastructure at the same pace of growth. Lack of choices in mobility options, resulting in car dependency lifestyle. And the absence of a planning system or framework with poor and confusing legislations and regulations, a distinct lack of quality guidance in the planning system, leading to a lack of consistent and integrated planning and urban design. The lack of capacity and capabilities in planning. There are not enough qualified and experienced planners, especially in regard of sustainability. There is no certificate that a planner or certification that a planner is capable of planning. Therefore, there is a lack of focus on quality outcomes, all of which directly or indirectly contribute to the unsustainable, low-quality urban environment of Saudi cities. Therefore, how can Saudi Arabia, a country that is experiencing a rapid urban growth, along with decreasing urban density, grapple with the challenge to make its cities more livable, and sustainable? Well, it will require a reset to the system in the country, as well as a stock take of what is good and what is actually happening. Part of the solution lays in how the Kingdom is seeking to address these issues through the objective of the Vision 2030 and the National Transformation Program 2025, which stresses the need to improve the urban scene and the quality of life of Saudi cities. Part of the solution will be grappling with laws and systems and cultures and practices. Having loose, wide laws that gives the opportunity to change, adjust, and move around can be convenient for the government. However, if the Kingdom is going to address sustainability issues, such as more sustainable building, low energy environment, and managing waste and the concept of circular economy, etc. That will require more detailed laws that both incentivize and penalize people, institutions, and companies in order to get them heading to the right direction. Cities being human habitat is where behavior needs to be changed. It is the same with planning for cities. To get better results, the Kingdom needs to robust its planning framework or system as a foundation. This is essential if sustainability outcomes are to be delivered for cities. The strategies, plans, regulations, and guidelines are needed, but need to be put in place. Right amount of enabling from law, supported by best practices. Similarly, behavior in urban development need both incentives and penalties to push it into the best direction. Regulations and incentives are both good and needed. So another part of the solution will be probably within the Center of Urban Design and Planning of Saudi Cities. It is a center for excellence for the planning and design of Saudi regions, cities, and places. It is where deep understanding of urbanism will be developed by building knowledge, innovation for cities, exploring ideas for places, and bringing ideas to life. We'll be working with Regional Development Authority, and we will be working also with stakeholders, government, private sectors, citizens, to achieve the Vision 2030 and the RDA's mandates, and hence sustainable outcomes for the Kingdom. So this is just a very nice diagram that I thought I should share at this point. And by Saudi cities, or when I say Saudi cities, mostly we share the same challenges or problems with our neighboring countries in the Gulf, but it can also extend to other countries in the region or even around the world. However, I just want to talk about the rapidly evolving and advancing urban technology and issues, and how our history or historic cities were organized, focused in community, local resources, and local efficiency and production. And then how we moved into the individual bits and pieces, where we are focused on specialization, efficiency, and productivity. And this is, I think, where we stand now in Saudi, in between the interconnected spaces, where we are focused on sustainability, integration, and participation. But what we want, or for the cities of tomorrow, or the space of tomorrow, is the resilient ecosystem and spaces where we are focused on collaboration, user experience, and quality of life. So we do want to move from the supply limited to the demand driven, and we want to move from organizational focus into user focused, product centered into experience centered, and from reactive to a proactive, and from static to adaptive. Sustainability is not about, sustainability is about our behavior. Sustainability is not words we speak, but actions we take. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Day, for your presentation. It's very interesting, you know, being user-focused, what you said is looking at the community and their needs, and it's very similar to how Joseph and Kareem mentioned in their topic. So thank you for that. So now we have around 15 to 20 minutes for general discussion among the speakers. Our online channels are open, and also the floor for questions, comments, or reactions. You know, from my end, I certainly have a few. So I'll probably start here. You know, what I noticed that all of you agree on the perspective that regeneration of urban cores is an important factor to tackle the challenges of rapid urbanization in cities around the world. However, the challenges differ from one region to another. In the West, gentrification of these older city cores tend to price out residents and push people to the suburbs, and ultimately losing a lot of the benefits of agglomeration. While in the Middle East, dilapidating conditions of these centers and urban cores either turn us sometimes to wipe out part of the area, or abandoning completely to migrate towards newer destinations and virgin lands, just like Kareem mentioned. I'd love to hear your inputs and what you think the region could benefit from lessons learned around the world to tackle it in an innovative manner. And maybe Kareem, we can hear from you, from the international perspective and what the region can benefit from.
Well, I had that regional example in mind of regeneration. There were I wouldn't call them successful. There were two examples of urban regeneration in the MENA region in the last 20 years or so. One is Solidaire, the central district of Beirut, known as Solidaire, and the other was the Maspero Triangle in downtown Cairo. And the major difference between these two examples in terms of gentrification or not gentrification and what happens to local communities, and also to touch on one question that we've already received from Muayyid Abbas about addressing the social fabric, is how do you make it more inclusive? How do you make it more equitable? In the case of Solidaire, I believe people who owned part of the land were given stake into the new development, while the residents within Maspero were less well-to-do and were effectively pushed out entirely to other regions. So had there been perhaps given an equity share into the new development, something that is of value, still anchors them to the land in the form of a business, small spaces to have their own businesses, and accommodation of their, or perhaps a recognition of their anchor to the land that doesn't entirely uproot them, that would have addressed this lack of inclusiveness compared to perhaps the example in Beirut. So that I think that I've touched on part of the question, which is the social aspect and not pushing out, because the gentrification issue is a global issue, and then as you pointed out, the dynamics of gentrification are different in the MENA region from what we have seen perhaps in Europe and the US. So I took one angle on it, which is the regional angle. I'll leave the rest to Joseph, perhaps.
All right. I have a couple of thoughts on this. One is, in light of the pandemic that we're living through, we may have seen the high point of gentrification. That is to say that those people who have the most disposable income, freedom of some choice as to where they live, may well decide that they, in fact, don't want to live in a dense urban area, but move to a medium-sized city or semi-urban, semi-rural area. And there's some evidence this is now going on in France to the benefit of intermediate-sized cities that are connected to Paris by high-speed rail. The market is changing, it's dynamic. But the point about gentrification is that it took time to catch on. People took risks. What we're talking about with urban regeneration is a different kind of process, whereby there have to be stakeholders and local leaders, people who have a commitment to a place, and who have a vision of how it can be redone. It's a very different process than gentrification. It requires, as I say, local leaders, often with a sense of passion. The problem that often comes up is the question of financing, which means that there has to be some risk sharing with the public sector it takes literally ownership of certain investments to be made. There may be infrastructural, there may be others. It may mean site reassembly, ownership, and then transfer. There are various ways you can do this, but it's not quite the same as gentrification. The one thing that is quite different about MENA cities, the MENA region from Western Europe, is the lower, the demographic profile. MENA has a larger percentage of younger people than the United States or Western Europe, and soon than China. This is it's a demographic driver which could lead to good or more difficult.
Very interesting. Maybe I can ask Lei. You know, you mentioned in your presentation that cities in Saudi Arabia had low quality and also are unsustainable to a certain extent. Maybe you can expand on what points, what are some good practices that cities are doing, like Riyadh, for example, and expand on that. You're on mute, Lei. We can't hear you.
Hi. Sorry. So yeah, there are multiple projects here and there. Most of them what we call the large projects, or the big projects, Mashari' al-Kubra. And I think everyone have heard of these projects. One of them would be Green Riyadh. The other would be King Salman, the Sport Boulevard, and others. That happens here and there, and it's good. Absolutely, it's good to have such projects. However, I don't think we could actually tackle the issue or the challenge that we face in our cities, and especially in Riyadh, by just concentrating in initiatives or such projects. Because at the end, we have to look at the core issue that we have in our cities, which is the urban sprawl, and the low quality infrastructure in our neighborhoods in particular. There is lack of green spaces, and we have all lived or experienced when the lockdown because of the pandemic have taken place, how all of these issues came into the service. Maybe we couldn't, or we didn't really feel it before, but when we were really faced by such a challenge, we start thinking about, or everyone would start thinking about, oh, well, I wish if there was, a sidewalk that I could walk to, around or into places while the lockdown is happening, or can I reach a service or a family house that is nearby safely and joyfully, I'd say. Can I go exercise in the open spaces in the public ground? But what we have went through just showed us that there is a great importance to the projects that we Riyadh or RCRC is having now, and as a Riyadh city in general, but there are more critical issues that we have to also pay attention to. The expanding and the urban sprawl is not just on the social or the green spaces or the public ground, but also on the infrastructure costs for cities. The cost of how are we gonna reach, a certain quality of infrastructure if we have cities that are, or we have neighborhoods that are like an hour from the center of the city. And I keep asking myself this question, and I would appreciate if Joseph and Kamal also help me. But I always have this question: if Riyadh is actually urban, it is urban on the sense of, yes, it's a big city. It has its boundary and it has its built boundaries. But do we consider it urban? Because for me, urban, and when I travel in particular, is that an urban city is where you go to an area where it's vibrant. You can reach into all the services in a timely manner. there is a very sustainable mobility system, and I'm not going to say transportation because I just want to emphasize on the fact that no, we're not looking just for transportation, but we want the whole system to work together, where walkability, biking, and other sort of transportation, or sorry, mobility could be afforded in cities. So in Riyadh, for instance, or if you want to go to a place where people gather, or when you see the majority of people, it's mostly a project, a street, normally extent of a street or a project itself by one developer, or a mall, which is really a practice that you see in the US and other cities in suburbia, not in cities, not in major cities, so yeah. This is what I wish for Riyadh. Hopefully, the focus would shift into more like the core of the issues of the everyday life for the citizens. Thank you.
Let me give you one answer. I've not had the pleasure of coming to your country, so I don't know what Riyadh looks like, but I think I can give you a quote from the late famous Peter Drucker, the great guru of management, who spent part of his American academic career in California. He said, Los Angeles is not a city. It is not a city. It doesn't work like a city. It's some kind of other organism. It's a parasite. It's fake. He did not like, I mean, you can take that as you will. The problem of California is the time people spend traveling in cars. People who spend time traveling to work or to shop, who walk, who bike, who take public transport, have a different life. And they commit themselves, there's a lot of American studies about this. People who spend more time in cars join fewer committees, participate in fewer organizations, attend fewer religious services. They are more isolated in other aspects of their lives. They don't interact with other people as much. So it's not just the amount of time that people spend traveling, it's how they travel that makes a difference to whether there is a vibrant city or a sterile city.
Thank you very much, Joseph, for that interjection. Just being aware of time, I want to open the floor to a question from the audience. We have around 5 minutes, so if there's any questions from the audience for our panelists.
There are questions in the chat box if you want me to
we'll
respond to some of them.
Yes, of course.
Thank you. I'm going to talk about something that we talked last night, something that relates to tourism and how tourism is impacting urban areas. And I give the example of Lisbon, where I come from, and how this city, as the past 7 years, I would say, became in particular very famous worldwide because it has tradition in the city center, has culture, and how this vehicle of attraction as a city brought tourists to all over the world to visit, and how these same tourists that were looking for this tradition are ruining the city. So the concept of sustainable tourism and how we can embed this in this process of shaping the urban area. So I would like to hear your thoughts.
Karim, do you have any addition to that?
Well, there's a balance to be struck, of course. There's a on such cities which do have cultural components of particular value, or even like World Heritage sites, for example. There's always the balance to preserve while also allowing the tourists to come in. And when the tourists come in, that they provide enough revenue to use to keep to keep up that heritage that you're trying to protect in the first place. And it's all about the management. It's all about the detail. How much do you allow people to interact with the value that you're trying to protect? Because they're here to see that value, but they're also a risk to that value. And how do you manage that? And that could be an entire district, entire historical district, that you could do that through guidelines as to what can or cannot be done. In this, that includes what can be built, what cannot be changed, even the level of details like the signage that you're allowed to use, for example, and how to maintain that character, while at the same time maintaining that draw of visitors in, because that's what keeps those communities alive. This is effectively an export business, and it keeps this flow of revenue that maintains those communities and keep them going. It is a tricky one, but I think it's all about management and all about the details of how you do it.
You have some examples in your region that I would like to visit in the form of some of the new cultural attractions, the museums and the other facilities that have been built that are now world famous. So you have an experiment going on, if you will, in your region in this regard. In Europe, let me mention a slightly different problem. Yes, there is the problem of the overconcentration of tourists in certain areas. Sometimes this is linked to behavioral patterns that are not at all welcome by the local population. Excessive noise, outdoor parties, drinking, things, polluting of various kinds. There is that. Then there are other places that say we don't have enough tourists. We have attractions. We have a museum. We have a waterfront. We have an historic center, this and that and the other. But everybody goes over there and they don't come to us. They go to Paris. They don't go to Nantes. Or they don't go to, they go to Nice, but they don't go to Marseille. So there are problems of inequity among cities that could actually have too many and not enough tourists. And that's a unmentioned problem, but it's there.
No, very interesting point. Lei, would you like to add to that before we end?
Sure. Well, when you say that there are some cities that are more popular than other cities, I think it has to do with also the legacy. Some cities has a legacy of somehow, and also branding, because we start or hearing about these, certain islands or cities that we didn't hear about 10 years ago, but they have worked on their city branding or whatever. But I would say for the region and for Saudi Arabia in particular, in terms of tourism and the whole sector, I think we have great and big potential. We do have a very rich history and very rich culture if we really play it right. But also we have to be very careful with managing the expectations. We just started. So it would be very important to not promote it as if it's already and we are 100% done already to receive tourists, but we can use it as if it's that's the first stage of tourism in Saudi Arabia, and we are working into having more and better experiences. But we definitely have a huge opportunity in terms of tourism in the country.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you very much, Lei. So before wrapping up our first half, any final thoughts from all of you, just in one sentence as we close? Professor Joseph, something very interesting that you said is adopting innovations from one city or country to another is something that people tend to shy away from because it's not implemented directly. In a quick sentence, if you can expand on that.
Well, I think that there's no reason why you can't have the same innovation in many different cities, except a kind of jealousy. You want to have something unique. The problem is context very often, that what works in one place doesn't fit into another. And so what interests me is the design and problem solving strategy that people adopt to come up with something that works in their place, in that context. And it may not, it may be unique, but the process is not unique. The process is something that we as social humans share. And we can help each other overcome the blind spots that we have when a solution may be obvious to somebody else and not to ourselves. A local solution may be obvious to somebody else and not to ourselves.
Great. In one sentence, Kareem,
I could say one sentence. Urban regeneration is important, and if we do it well, we could improve the urban mobility, we could improve livability, we could improve equity, we could improve the city's operational efficiency, we could improve the environmental performance, and we could even improve our social fabric. So it's a well worth effort, although it is very hard.
Well, I don't know what to say after Kareem. He got it in point. Definitely, urban regeneration is our hope, I would say, in our cities, because we already have grown. I'd say 80% of our cities has been already established. So it would be nice to actually look at the old and really learn from our mistakes and just. We have a more of, I'd say, a process, and we don't move from the problems that we face into a green field, but actually resolve and work with what we have created already. Thank you so much.
thank you very much, everyone. Appreciate your time. And with that, we draw a conclusion to the first half. We invite everyone that's invited to the second half under Chatham House rules to please stay online. And thank you all for joining us tonight. And